And so now they have a lot of meat and wool and dairy and wine. And as a percentage of their GDP, agriculture is a pretty big center.
Yes.
So they will be driving education. And then other than that, yeah, I think it's been more economic activity. You know, we need the industry, we need the tourism, we need the retirees. You know, these towns that are worded just need a bigger tax base. And another thing I talk about a lot is think about all the taxes you pay, right? All your local taxes, your state taxes, your federal taxes. And of all those taxes, which are the most taxes that you pay? Usually it's federal. Yeah, it's the most taxes you pay. But then you think about the services that you get. Most of the services that you get from the government is local stuff. You know, your schools, your roads, your police, your fire, water, sewer, all of that. And so why we're sending so much of our money off the federal government and then asking for the government to give it back to us? We should just have federal government take less of it. Let's keep that money local at the local and state level and just solve our problems locally, spending on roads and
yeah, right now they're taking our taxes and they're not giving it back because they've ended the PBS library funding, NPR.
Right.
What else? Department of Education. I'm like, this is not cool. It's not.
Like, why do we send our money to Washington and then we have to ask for a grant to get the money back? Because the government, federal government, and any government, they don't have any money. It's our money. It's our tax money. And so they're either sending our tax money back or they're borrowing it, which is worse because that's inflationary, puts us in a debt. You know, there are things in our bank that are not there, or they print money, which is even worse. So, for example, in 2020, whenever we have an economic growth, the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the central bank prints money to help kind of soften the impact of the recession. So they did that in 2008, we did it in 2020. Since 2020, the money supply has increased 50%. 50% in 6 years. So that means for every $100 that were in the economy in 2020, there are now $150 in the economy. That means all of your paycheck and your savings has been cut by a third. So when people are like, you know, what's going on with inflation? Obviously, it's the tariffs, it's the war in Iran, and it's the fact that we're printing all this money, and so the value of each dollar is going down. That monetary is too weak. And then because we have all this inflation, the Fed has to keep the interest rates high to try to rein in that inflation. So you've got this like superfecta of inflationary pressure. Oh, and the fifth one, by the way, is deficit spending. So whenever the government borrows money and spends borrowed money, that also is inflation. And so, you know, like people are like, why are prices going up so much? It's all of the poor decisions that the government is making. And, you know, and that's why, you know, one of the reasons I kind of take it from a libertarian perspective is that, you know, it's one thing that the government is trying to help, and maybe they're doing some good, but not as much good as they could be doing. But in this case, it would have been better off if they literally did nothing. You know, like if we didn't have tariffs, didn't have a war in Iran, you know, and like with the farming, you know, that's what there were tariffs that backfire in terms of a trade war, and that's why our farmers are hurting now, and that's why we need a bailout. And you know, Tom Cotton wants to say that he's anti-communist, anti-socialist, but then we're implementing tariffs to raise federal money, hurting the farmers, and then we have to bail the farmers out. Like, if that's not the definition of socialism, I don't know what is. And that's the thing too. Like you know, I talk to liberal groups, I talk to conservative groups, I talk to libertarian groups. I was on the Tea Party radio program in Jonesboro the other week. Because when I talk to conservatives, I say, I don't think Tom Cotton is a conservative on the things that are important to conservatives. Yeah. So, for example, he's not a constitutional conservative. He doesn't care much about the First Amendment. You know, he tried to block the Press Act. then people are, protesting for whatever they want to protest for. That is your constitutional right to organize such a protest. And he wants to send the military in those streets to suppress protests. He obviously doesn't care about the Fourth Amendment. The License 702 against Citizens United. Happy to have a government that can spy on us. So he just doesn't seem like a constitutional loser, and it's certainly not a fiscal concern. He's signing these bills, like the one big beautiful bill, the $2 trillion deficit, our debt is now $30 trillion. So, to me, he's not concerned.
And he doesn't care about the people in Arkansas. He really doesn't, or he wouldn't be doing these things. They're not listening. We're hammering them. Phone calls, postcards, emails. They get blah, blah back. I call them blah, blah emails.
Right. And that's because he is taking his constituents for granted. He knows there's a very high likelihood
It'll be real like you.
So he's taking everybody for granted. And his focus is it's on party politics. I'm sure he wants to run for president. So if he's not only is he not speaking with Arkansans, he's not talking to Arkansans. He's not talking about Arkansans. He's not solving problems for Arkansans. He's talking to
his Republican groups.
He's catering to nationwide. Like when we look at what he's posting on Twitter, on X, he's not. The reason he's saying the things that he's saying is to strengthen his appeal with that that part of the base where he thinks he's strong. And obviously his focus is very much on foreign affairs, intelligence, military. He chairs the intelligence committee, the armed services committee. So, if you're going to be in a role like that, you have to be able to walk and shoot down the side. Well,
Mr. Wadlen, my name is Jessica Kennedy. I'm here today as a representative of a local grassroots organization called Ozark Free to Future.
I forgot.
We are a public education advocacy group.
okay.
And you mentioned that your wife is a school nurse, and so I imagine this is something that's near and dear to your family and to your heart. But I've got a headline for you. You're hosting a community forum in Mountain Home on September 15th at the Jackson County Library, and I'd love to send you some information about the event and invite you to consider being a member of the panel during the event. Awesome. And then also, right now we are working on what we call a backpack initiative. We're calling it "What Do You Want in Your Backpack?" And so we raised money and purchased 51 new backpacks and distributed them along with school supplies to some of our area schools.
That's awesome.
And so we're interested not only in helping to support students in schools with school supplies, but also we're interested in working with local and state leaders and to find institutional supports that we can use to ensure that public education stays strong going into the future. And so I'm wondering if I could get you to fill out one of our cards for us. What do you want in your backpack? And I do have some benefits here that community members have filled out. So if you'd like to see what others have said, got some things there. But I'd love to see
I see.
what
this
you
is
would
my
like in
favorite
your.
too.
That's right.
Okay.
So I'll show you mine. That's not mine, but I agree with that one. So. That's not mine either, but I agree with mine. Mine is Los Angeles It's fully funded school, public schools. That was mine. But we have things like more funding for teachers, small class sizes. But what do you envision? What do you think is strong public schools?
Yeah, that's a good point.
What do you want in your school?
There's so many different things. One thing I think about a lot is, in terms of education, is like, what are kids getting education for? And the primary level and the college level and so forth. It's so they can get a job, so they can get a good paying job. And I feel like all too often in school, we're not talking about careers. So people are thinking like, well, what do I like? What are my skills? What are the opportunities in my town or opportunities somewhere else?
So you want to focus on workforce?
Yeah, like starting that conversation about careers.
Art, wonderful, love it. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I just think they're too focused on those standardized tests that they have to go take. Whichever years it
Do
is.
you want to fill one out for me too, Debbie? Okay. Sorry. Kelly has my other marker, but I can.
Because I learned a lot of things in school that they're not learning now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my grandsons who are adults,
Mm-hmm.
my youngest one has a P.O. box. He did not know how to tell people to put it on an envelope to send it to him. I was like, are you kidding?
Mm-hmm.
That was yesterday. He was 22 yesterday. I was like,
Well, happy birthday.
I mean, I was in shock.
Mm-hmm. They're
not teaching things that they need to teach. Just down to earth things that we were taught in school. Yeah.
Should I email you? I'll email you here so I can get it.
I thought I'll stick some information here. The date's not on there. Should I email you or should I call you or text you with this
Either one.
information?
Yeah, either way.
Is this a cell phone? Can I text it to
It
you?
is, yeah. It's like a Google Voice kind of thing. It works for me, but text voice kind. So,
All right, I'll text you the information. It's September 15th.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of information that I can send you.
I'll see it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. But yeah, other than that, I mean, when I think about the federal issues, like I'm thinking that, I'll be honest, particularly about the things that the most important programs that the federal government is working on, and when I talk to people about why I got into this race, one thing I say is, I kind of wish in this country there was a Labor Party that is focused on working people, but because the Democratic Party used to be, but I think they've kind of lost their way.
Well, both parties used to be for the people, and then it seemed to be taking over. With what I do, I look at what PACs have done to this country. I mean, you got look at APOC and what they've done. They're in both parties, and they're spending so much money. I mean, let's look at Cotton. He won the running beats.
Yep.
He always seems to have all this money. Where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from APAC and all these PACs. So when you look at what's, like Bernie said, we have to get rid of the certain things. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, when you sit here and look at how much money was spent just against NASA. So he was,
Yeah.
I mean, they spent millions on that guy.
And not just the money and the ads and the garden money and the mailers and the TV ads. It's not just the fact that they're running ads, but the ads that they're running are just deceptive.
Right.
So they ran that ad with him and AOC and whatever it was, and they called him a throuple. So there were some folks who thought that he literally was having an affair with these, these honors. It's like, no, it was,
Well, then, kind of like what they even done in this state, running against Brian King, all those mailers that came out.
Yeah, that's right.
Outright lying.
Yeah, I was talking to Brian on the phone just yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get it, but people tend to fall into that. But this year, what I'm seeing is it changed a little bit. Either people are getting wiser to it,
Yep.
and our own this little area here, they stood with Brian King, which was I was a little nervous about that he didn't end up pulling that out. But then you look statewide. I know that Sanders sent $50 million to Israel. Wow.
Oh, actually, I think it was 100.
100 million?
Maybe only 50 of it came out of the retired employees retirement fund. Which did you not hear about that?
No.
Yeah, I know it's 50 million. I work for the state. So I'm a retired state employee. APERS. I'm going to say she talked them out of it, but that board took $50 million out of our retirement fund and invested it over with Israel. And I'm understanding the total was 100,000, but I thought it was only 50 that came out of that fund. So if there's another If it's 100 million, then another.
Right. So it's supposed to be invested.
Yeah.
Be invested.
Yeah. And they didn't check with us. They don't have to, but I think pretty much everybody would have said, no, we don't want our money invested like that. You know, I didn't like that.
But then you start seeing,
Well, her dad is the.
I know, but that has nothing to do with why she should have done that.
she shouldn't have done that anyway, because I mean, this would be so much money from the federal government. Why is this state sending that money over there? So I mean, that's the issue.
Yeah, and Israel has the healthcare.
Right.
So we can afford healthcare for our folks,
But we can find another country that has that. Yeah.
I kind of want to broaden out of Arkansas a little bit to things that are going on in Washington right now, like Blanche Todd. You know, you're going to be, if you get elected, you're going to be involved in hearings and all this stuff. Where are you on some of those things like Blanche Todd? Todd Blanche? Which is it?
Oh,
Yeah, the acting attorney general.
I mean, it's not surprising that, Trump is putting his closest allies in positions of power. And it's pretty telling when, I mean, obviously the Democrats are voting against a lot of those nominees, but in the case of Blanche, a lot of Republicans are voting against it too, particularly around that, $1.8 billion slush fund that they tried to create to just give away to their buddies.
Well, he's agreed to stop that. He put that in writing, but they're still,
But, I mean, I think you're seeing this in that equation that, they'll try something and they'll run into a roadblock with the courts or something, and they'll just try it a different way. So even though they put that in writing, that,
he can break
I
it.
would not take that to the bank.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if the day after he's sworn in that, they find a workaround to do it.
So would you vote to confirm him?
No.
Oh,
But yeah, and so going back to some of the other things you're asking about, like what are these bigger programs? So, and also too, like I was saying, there needs to be a Labor Party, but there isn't. And so for me, the Libertarian Party gets closest to that. And my issue is that the people I'm focused on are working people, the middle class and the working class that are, above the poverty line, but not millionaires. But that's like 80% of people. And those are the people who are doing all the work, paying all the taxes, applying the least benefits from the government on everybody else, and not bothering anyone. The system isn't designed for us anymore. And, when you talk to people from other countries, they talk about the American dream, right? And there's opportunity here. Well, the American dream is dying. That contract where if you work hard, you can get ahead, and you should be better off than your parents, and your kids should be better off than you. And that's not happening anymore because, like people talk about, let's make America great again, right? Well, that sounds great, but what exactly does that mean? And to me, we're focused on the middle class, right? So that's, to me, that the focus is.
What happened?
Things supportive that, if you're working your job, you should be able to provide, you should be able to have health care, you should be able to buy a house, be able to raise your kids, all of that. And so now back to the federal government, think about all the things that are going on. So number one, we have to stop the tariffs. That's inflationary. And it's not good for free trade. Number two, we have to stop the rules. That's inflationary. Should have never been started. And by the way, and I talked about this on Fully 29 Tom Cotton had more to do with precipitating the need for that rule than anyone else, because he was the one who was most involved in scuttling the JCPOA, right, which is the agreement from an earlier administration to constrain their enrichment of nuclear materials. Now, it was by far not a great deal because it didn't do anything against the missiles, it didn't do anything down sponsoring the proxies, Hezbollah plus. So it wasn't a perfect deal. But then the Trump first administration came in, they just ripped up the deal altogether and replaced it with nothing. And like I was listening to this Foreign Policy podcast the other morning. He was like, yeah, the JCPOA was probably a grade D, not a good deal. But the MOU that was signed recently was like an F. So we went from bad to good. So anyway, we need to open the straight and stop that on there. And then also, one of the arguments for fighting this war is because we're protecting ourselves, right? Protecting ourselves. Well, I can't think of many countries that have been collapsed to a foreign invader in recent history, but I can think of several companies that have had, or countries that have had a financial crisis, and that's what we're on the way to with the way that with our deficit spending and running of the debt. And the two main, so we need a balanced budget. Like, look, I'm all for lower taxes, but we can't cut taxes until the budget is balanced. So that, I mean, you guys don't get to leave out in your family budget. You don't get to say, well, I only have this much money this month, but I want to buy a fancier car, so I'm just going to go into debt and more debt and more debt forever, endlessly. And then when you die, your kids inherit your debt. That's not the way it should work. Anyway, and the two biggest things driving the debt right now are Social Security and health care. And so we have to fix those. And so Social Security, first of all, we have to fulfill the promises for retirees and people who are approaching retirement. They've been getting their statements from Social Security all these years now. You get your retirement, here's what you're going to get. Well, Social Security and trust fund is going to run dry in 6 years. So something's going to happen. And I don't think it's fair to change the benefits that people were promised. So,
Benefits that we.
that's right.
I think they're borrowing from the fund. There are how many people who die every year before they even get to Social Security age, and their money isn't given back to their family. It stays in the fund. I think they're borrowing money out of the Social Security fund and using it for whatever they want. That needs to stop.
Social Security is not a savings, it's not an investment. It's a pay-as-you-go system. And the payroll taxes that fund Social Security are the most regressive taxes there are. It's 15% from the first dollar you make. And so that's a particular burden on, young people and lower income people. Those folks are paying for the health care and the retirement of their grandparents. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. So anyway, we need to secure it for the folks for what they've been promised, but then at the same time, for kids that are just being born today, we need a fundamentally different system. So if we were to give every child when they're born a $10,000 loan, that would grow and just put it in an index fund in the stock market. By the time they retire at 65, that would be worth $4 to $5 million. So 10,000 in, with $4 to $5 million out. And since it's a loan, there's basically no cost to the government. And the way Social Security works today is, over the course of your lifetime where you're working, on average, you'll put in about $400,000 into Social Security. And then in retirement, you'll get out about $400,000. Like, it would have been better off if the government would say, don't pay us your Social Security, just take it to the bank and put it in a CD at 4 or 5%. You would end up way better off. So it's a terrible system, but it has to be propped up in the short term for the people who, who promised their Social Security benefits. But long term, it has to be replaced with a different system that's not the pay-as-you-go system.
The biggest problem, though, also with Social Security is once you reach a salary to like $100,000, you can opt out.
You're saying once you draw your benefits?
Yeah, I'm saying once you're a salaried person and you reach $100,000 a year, you can opt out.
They don't take Social Security out of your checks, or they don't.
Well, that needs to change as well, because I know many people that have done it. Several.
And they're making a trade-off. They're saying, I want to pay in less, but I'll take out less later.
What they set up